Thanks, Alex. With that, I'll introduce Iain. Iain is our second presenter for today. Iain is in an infrastructure industry digital advisor, that's quite a mouthful, director of COMIT and a reservist officer in the Royal Engineers. With over 20 years experience in delivering innovations into construction and BIM digital advice to organizations all over the world, he is now part of the National Digital Twin Program, utilizing his military, industry and technology skills to forward the UK's digital journey. Thank you, Iain.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sandy. Okay. So I'll just have to remember what my slides were all about today. So Alex mentioned very briefly that we were doing a demonstration project on the Isle of Wight. And she said, you know, the reason we picked it was because it had a boundary. Actually, the reason I picked it was because there's a hovercraft going over. And I'd not been on that hovercraft since I hadn't ever been on. I watched it as a kid and was never allowed on it. And eventually, at the beginning of last year, when we started the project off, I got to go on the hovercraft. And it was so exciting. I had to take lots of photographs and send them round to people because I was just like one big kid. It was very exciting. Anyway. That wasn't the reason, of course, that we picked the Isle of Wight. We picked the Isle of Wight because it was a really good ecosystem of all the various infrastructure out there for doing the project. So what I wanted to talk to you very briefly about, quick 15 minutes, so people are going to have to keep me on time because you know how much I waffle, is the circuit board decisions, the things that we do in the Royal Engineers that we used as the basis to help us to set up the demonstrator for the National Digital Twin on the Isle of Wight. So I'm part of 12 engineer group. We used to be 170 Royal Engineers. We've got a stand there. If any of your employees are interested in getting involved, we're looking at infrastructure engineers, people who can go out and do really cool things with a little bit of green stuff behind as well. But actually, there's quite a few of us in the room. Well worthwhile going and talking to them. So part of our role is to support humanitarian aid and disaster relief around the world, helping out non-governmental organisations and governments wherever that we are needed. And what we do is we go out and we do infrastructure assessments. And that is, there's a country that has been very damaged, might be Nepal after the earthquake, might be the British Virgin Islands after the hurricane. A lot of infrastructure is destroyed. How do we preserve humanity? How do we preserve society? Well, we go in and we do an infrastructure assessment that says, what are the things that are damaged? What are the most important things? What are the most critical things? What are the most vulnerable things from aftershocks, etc.? So understanding what are the critical things, we can then understand where to put the priorities for spending, where we can put our limited resources in a country which is badly damaged to rebuilding. What do we rebuild first? What do we put back online to help protect the most lives to get that society back on its feet again at the end? So that assessment helps us understand the interdependencies and the criticalities of vulnerabilities and ultimately the priorities of where the NGOs, the governments and other organisations such as the military can be deployed to help people to get things back online. Now, infrastructure assessments as a whole, okay. Anybody recognise the triangle below? What is it? Maslow's. Awesome. Okay, Maslow's hierarchy. Infrastructure is one of the basic things we need to hold society up and sustain people, the life. We have a very manual and very, very quick and dirty process. Whenever I'm introduced at the National Digital Twin Programme meetings, I'm always introduced as the person who did the quick and dirty to the project. So we are the quick and dirty people. We're able to cover multiple domains and sectors. So we cover all these things, looking at the infrastructure of where they are, what they are, how they interconnect and how they depend on each other, what the vulnerabilities are, how they're damaged, whether they're still alive, how can we put them back together again afterwards, and if we have the resources to do so. It gets results and it can be scaled and refined. You can scale it down all the way down to a single asset or facility, all the way up to an entire country or multiple countries within a region. So it's a very powerful tool. However, it's very what we like to term mandrolic. Okay, it literally is an Excel spreadsheet and some aerial photography and a big highlighter, and that's our tools. Because it's got to be. We can't rely on fancy technology to do things when we're in a country that might not have an internet connection anymore, might not have power to run a computer. So we've got to be really quite resilient in our own efforts there. So I did the CNI course many years back, Critical National Infrastructure course with the Royal Engineers, and we, whilst we were sitting there, the light bulb came on. Me and Major Fry went, ooh, this could actually deliver something that would deliver us a national digital twin. All very, very excited. Came back, presented the CP&I and BEIS in 2018 and said, can you do something? Do you think we could do something like that? Obviously, glacial movements of all sorts of things, but 2020, towards the end of 2021, they came back to me and said, hey, do you want to do something? It's kind of like, can I do it on the Isle of Wight? There's a hovercraft. Yeah, okay, fine, you've got me. I'm sold. So what I did was I spent my Christmas, a very interesting Christmas, 5 very long days. I took the Isle of Wight, I used Google Earth, I used Ordnance Survey, I zoomed in and I used things like open source data. It's amazing what people publish. Alex was saying this earlier in her presentation, but they put out there so much data that they shouldn't do. One of those, you can find it on the online, so I'm not going to break any boundaries here. Grotmeyer had done an analysis of the energy network on the Isle of Wight and published it. So all the connections, all the positions, everything that relied on everything else was all there in a paper on the internet. You can just pick it off and look at it and then analyze it and present it back in there. So during those 5 long days, I assessed, I placed pins on a map, 1,357 individual assets, and then networked them to understand how they initially connected to each other in their own sector. So power to power, power to power, and then across power to water, to communications, to transport to medical, medical to government to et cetera, all over. So basically you get this massive circuit board that you understand the entire relationships of all these things and how they interconnect and work together. And I got to tell you that spreadsheet is crazy. It's absolutely mad. If you think about 1,357 things down one side, 1,357 things along the top, and then you kind of like put the pins in the map to say which one connects to which all the way through, your brain goes slightly crazy. And I've got to say, it took a lot of gin and tonic over that Christmas. We went through many, many bottles, but we got there and delivered it. So the Isle of Wight demonstrator, as well as going through the connectivity, you use that connectivity to do something called a Carver analysis. Carver analysis understands what connects to what, how they rely on each other, how they depend on each other, but also where they are. Are they accessible? So are they behind a fence? Are they behind a bund? Can I, public, just walk in on them? Or are they hidden in a basement somewhere that I can never find them? On 2 reasons. 1, I could creep in and steal them or vandalize them. Or 2, if I'm the person trying to mend them and it's not my world, how do I find them to actually mend it in the first place? So it's a double-edged sword. Things like recognizability. If I'm not a water engineer and I'm told, you've got to go in there and fix that pump. It's like, I'm in a room. There is some things in there. I don't know which one it is. How recognizable is this thing to the thing that I'm being told to go and fix or to maintain or potentially to steal? Okay. Can the people who would like to steal something or damage something, can they stand outside in the street and go, that building is full of copper cables. Right, I can nick all that lot and make a few bucks. So, double-edged sword. Criticality and vulnerability is part of the calculation that helps its accessibility, recoverability, effect, and recognizability. Gives us this whole set of things that we need to understand. Right, how quickly do I need to get off of here? 10:25. Oh, I've still got 9 minutes. That's great. But we might have a few minutes in the bag because we're getting towards the end of this one. So there had to be a better way. Excel spreadsheets, no good to anybody really at all. When you start looking at it and you're trying to analyze it and visualize what's going on, it just blows your brain and starts to destroy your Christmas, which it did a little bit. So we sat down, we thought, right, is there going to be a better way to do this? Well, there has to be a better way. There's got to be an automated way. Can we use, and you'll see them a little bit later on, satellite imagery to detect something, image recognition, to know what it is, and then perhaps detect the lines between them, and then detect where things are perhaps buried, or detect how they are connected? I don't know. Yes, there is ways of doing that, and we're going to see a little bit about that later on from the Earth Eye guys. Can we then bring in information from closed sources, from those different organisations, to verify and validate that, and also to bring in information that's not visible? Things like, is there a fallover? Is there a reserve system there that could help us? Is there backup information somewhere? Is there a nice warehouse full of sandbags, temporary works, and telehandlers that can actually help us to then recover what's going on? And then can we start plugging in other things like cover analysis? Can we look in investment priorities? So what are the things that we need to do first to a country? Might not be a disaster scenario. This might be how we're going to put the strategy together for the infrastructure of a country in its own right. Then we look down at things like overlaying flooding and erosion, historical mapping to see, is it going to start being affected in 5 years' time? Do we start reacting to it now? What's the historical world? Can we put in artificial intelligence to help us look at condition monitoring, see how things are going from those databases, and perhaps using side aperture radar to see cracks, bends, movement in various assets? Can we bring economic data in to look at where we need to build businesses? Because economic data is just another data set to bring in to this. It's another network. It's not a visible network, but it's another network, just the same as any water network is. And then perhaps, as we've used a little bit in the Isle of Wight demonstrator, the human networks, because nothing works without people. We found that out during COVID. So many systems out there are vulnerable to people, because if the people's not there, well, then that bit of infrastructure doesn't work. And if the infrastructure doesn't work, then we've got a real issue with that world. So I'm going to leave us on this point, that there has to be a better way. And I think there is a better way, but the foundation of that better way has to come from technology. Okay, it also has to have some good standards behind it, and you can see I'm sort of segueing already into Iain's presentation.